there, I'm Square, and let's talk about art. So today we are continuing this Persona series, I guess I started. You'll notice that again we're jumping into a partially sketched drawing. But this time, I realized a little earlier than I did with the Haru sketch. So while we're jumping in a little bit late, we didn't miss that much, and I'm remembering a bit sooner. And with the next one, I remembered, I think, exactly on time, so improvement. Today, we are sketching Ann. Now, I chose Ann next because, honestly, I really just wanted to draw her hair. I really like how they did the hair in the Persona series, and I had a lot of fun with Haru's hair, so Ann just seemed like a natural one to jump to next. You may notice as I'm working on this that I actually have my previous drawing, the one of Haru, on a separate layer. I did this on purpose so I could make sure that the Ann and Haru drawings matched up. Since I wanted to make this kind of a sister piece to the last one, I wanted the eyes to line up, I wanted the sizing to line up, so I'm constantly flipping back between the two to make sure that they match up pretty well, and they look like they kind of fit together. And overall, I think that really did help with designing this character. So since Haru had a mug of coffee/hot chocolate, I was thinking, what kind of drink should I give to Ann? And I figured that she might be one of those girls that really enjoys going to Starbucks and trying out all those different type of lattes, especially the seasonal special ones they have throughout the year. So I wanted to make kind of a Persona World Starbucks equivalent cup in my drawing. I originally thought to decorate it with a Starbucks logo equivalent of the Persona universe. Since in our world, Starbucks' mascot is a siren, mermaid type of creature with two tails, I wanted to find a mermaid siren type of Persona monster to use on the cup. This was my original idea, but ultimately I did go in a different direction, and you'll see that later once we get to coloring. At this point, I am at the inking portion, and I did not struggle as much with the inking as I did with the Haru one. Yay! While the inking is not perfect, my lines were working a little bit better this time. I did struggle in some places, like this weird curve around her head when it comes to the earmuffs, but ultimately I was a lot happier with my line work on this project. Again, this outfit, just like the one with Haru, is one from Persona Royale. This particular outfit is Ann's winter outfit that you see her in January. And I really thought it was cute. I love seeing Ann with these really fluffy earmuffs next to her big poofy hair. That kind of texturing, it's adorable. I love it. So when I saw that, and I already drew Haru's special outfit, I knew I had to draw Ann in this one. And I also got to draw her in a scarf. And I love scarves. I love how they look. I love the volume they give to a character. So being able to include that, I'm like, yes, this is definitely what I want to draw. So even though I'm drawing each of the characters holding some type of drink, that's kind of the unifying thing along with the sizing and relative posing of the face, I want to have the hands be slightly different every time. I don't want them all to be carbon copies of each other. I want them to be a little bit unique other than their hair and just eye color, stuff like that. And I want to give her like really delicate fingers. In the game, they emphasize just how, feminine Ann is and how attractive she is. So in my head, she would have like really feminine hands with long fingers and probably long nails and keeps them manicured and things like that. She's a very pretty character, and I really like her character design. So it's fun to think of all these tiny little details and how to incorporate them in my own type of style. She's also wearing this jacket over this really funky shirt. And I like this jacket design. It looks like a leather jacket. And those have such a nice volume and body and texture to them. So it's another thing that I really enjoy drawing. And I had a little bit of trouble coloring it later, but ultimately I did get it to work. And I'm really happy with how that design went. When drawing her hair, I like to switch down to a thinner pen. Now, normally with my inking pens, I do stick with the G pen. I use a Manga Studio when I'm coloring. It got rebranded and renamed to, was it Clip Studio? I believe Clip Studio Paint. And it's a great program for this type of like anime inspired style art. And it has these versions of pens that a lot of manga artists use in real life, like the G pen. And G pen's really good for doing weighted lines and using pressure to get different amounts. But I like to force the line thickness lower whenever I'm doing hair and things that I expect to be smaller. So I don't have to worry so much about being really soft on my pen. It just automatically is lower if I make it smaller. It makes things a little easier. So the computer program is a little bit easier, which I am grateful for, because that inking line work portion was always my least favorite of traditional art and easily the most stressful. So I'm cleaning up my line work a bit, because while I was a lot happier with my line work, it wasn't perfect. To be honest, line work is never perfect. You just have to make it work for you and work with the abilities that you have. I don't believe in perfection in art. It's not a huge deal to me that it didn't turn out exactly perfect how I wanted it to. I had a little bit of trouble with her face shape here. I realized that on Haru, while I did draw her head, I ended up covering up like every bit of the side of her face with either her hair or her puffy jacket. So there was a lot of adjusting when I got to Ann, because even though I did overlap Haru, my original Haru drawing with it, it's hard to see where her head was supposed to be. I also had to adjust the earmuffs, because once I put in her eyes, the earmuffs and eyes overlap in a way that just doesn't make sense. And erasing like a little chunk of the earmuff so it doesn't show up in the eye doesn't work. So complete change, twisting around the angles of the earmuffs, but ultimately I feel like that was a better choice. I think it worked out really well, as I was able to show these like two little curls of hair, and it frames her face really well. So even though this was kind of a mistake drawing the earmuffs that way, it ended up working out in the end. Sometimes you just got to kind of work with it and make it work. And it might turn out how you don't expect, but better. So that's another thing I would suggest to you. Just don't give up, even if it's not turning out exactly how you want your artwork to go. Sometimes these mistakes make things better. We're getting into the coloring now, and I'm laying down some tones. And one thing I wanted to do was really emphasize the skin tone differences between each character. So in real life, even if you're with somebody that has a similar skin tone to you, there's slight differences between all of us. So that's something that I did want to show. I don't want to just blanket color it all exactly the same way. I want each character to have slight differences between them to show that they're different people. And I also am showing that in the eyes here. You may notice that I am taking a little bit of a shortcut here. I wanted the eyes to match up perfectly. Like if I were to make a GIF of all of these characters, I want the eye to stay consistent placement wise and have just everything change around it. And that's something I might end up doing, is I think it might look kind of neat. So I honestly just cut out Haru's eyes from the original picture, paste them onto Ann, adjusted the eye shape around it, but with the iris and the pupil, left them as they were, just recolored them. And it also caused me to not shade the skin first for once. Looking at the picture of Ann, once I had the eyes there, the brown, no, that's not her eye color. I had to change it to blue, which means eyes were done first. Which, different for me, but it's all working out. Now, normally when I'm shading and I do this cell shading style, I tend to use max 3 colors in each section. One base color, one highlight color, and one shadow color. And you'll see that pretty consistent throughout the piece. Sometimes I'll only do 2. This depends on what exactly it is that I'm coloring, the little details of what I'm coloring. But I do have to break that pattern later. Now at this part, you'll see that I am doing something a little weird with the scarf. I had an idea for adding texture to make it look a little more scarf-like, because scarves have a very like knitted looking texture, especially the type that looks like she's wearing. So I wanted to try to convey that with just shading and tones and color, and not adding in too many black lines to this section. I wasn't sure if it was going to work, so I just kind of went for it all zoomed in like this. So this is pretty much what I'm seeing. While I do have a preview thing up in the top right, you can't see it super duper well. It kind of just shows you more of like, where are you on the picture when you're zoomed in? But zoomed out, I pause for a second. I'm like, oh, yay, I like this. I'm happy. Like it looks a little rough, but that's kind of what I wanted. I don't want a perfect scarf shape. Scarves aren't perfect, especially if they're homemade scarves. So I really like how this turned out. I think it conveys that texture I want, but still gives it kind of a roughish homemade quality. At this point, I am working on the jacket, and this was probably the trickiest thing to shade on her, like out of all of her clothes. Creating that leather effect, that kind of shine that natural leather has, is rough. And I was for a while really trying to stick to my 3-color pattern that I tend to do, the mid-tone, the highlight, the shadow. But that just doesn't work when you're trying to get this shiny highlight effect. So eventually I had to scrap it and bring in more tones. I was a little worried it would look a little muddy by doing that, but I think it ultimately worked out in the end. It doesn't look good for the longest time. While I'm working on this, it looks rough, it looks scribbly, it looks like I don't know what I'm doing, but somehow in the end, I feel like it came together. I can't tell you how. It was just a lot of experimenting, a lot of just trying to be flexible with the piece and not planning too much ahead, just trying this here, trying this there. Is this working here? Is this working there? And eventually I'm just like, whoa, okay, I'm stopping. Like you can see this pause right here. I'm like, oh my gosh, I actually like this. I think this worked. Let's leave it alone. I don't want to overwork it and move on. You may be noticing there's a good chunk of time left in the video, but it looks like Ann is mostly done. Well, the majority of the time, and honestly, I think the biggest straight chunk out of this video was me shading her hair. I did not expect it to take this long, but looking at her hair, it's a work of art in itself. Looking at that screenshot from the game, the one I have in the upper left corner, those developers, those artists that work on the game spent so much time on her hair. It looks beautiful. The way they have it layered, it looks silky, but it looks full at the same time. It has body, it has dimension, it has this extreme contrast, which I'm a huge fan of. And it is just, it looks so well taken care of. I don't know how they pulled it off, but it is beautiful. So as I started to finish up the picture, and I'm just like, yay, I'm almost done. I almost always do hair last before background. I realized I wasn't even close to being done. The hair was going to take some time, and I'm glad I took my time with it. It was a little rough to do, but ultimately I'm happy with how it turned out. It took some experimenting with the shading and the shapes I decided to end up using for the highlights in the end, but I think it's a highlight of the piece. It's probably my favorite part of what I drew with Ann. Ann as a character, I loved her in the beginning. I thought she was a great addition to the team. Her whole story, and especially in the first palace that you go in, it's a little rough. And that's something I really respect Persona for. They're not afraid to touch on topics that a lot of games and a lot of studios that create games would not touch with a 20-foot pole. But they will go for it and they'll make it relatable and feel real. And her story especially was one that was really hard to watch, but also really compelling. And I'm so glad that they did that to kind of introduce her character, because it got you attached to her like right away. It was really well done. I do feel like they kind of took away from the message that they had with the next palace and the lead up into it. The whole thing with her and Yusuke was a poor choice in tone, should I say, after how much they emphasize the first story. Now, I don't want to give any spoilers for those of you who haven't watched cutscenes or played the game, and I would highly recommend you play if you haven't played it yet, but those of you who had played, you know what I'm talking about. Now, Ann as a character, I find her really adorable, and I love her interactions with Ryuji. I honestly, I ship her harder with Ryuji than I do with the MC. I love their little dynamic in the relationship. I'm kind of a sucker for those type of relationships. It's so anime, especially shoujo anime tropey, but oh, I love it. It's so compelling. These characters who have just such a dynamic relationship where they kind of pick on each other, but they really care about each other. It's just, like I said, it's so tropey, but I really love it. Now, if you follow her romance option, it's fine. I like the stuff that showed off her character, but I am not a fan of the catty, mean girl ruining your life trope that they decided to go with. The parts where you just kind of interact with Ann by herself and on her own and all that were great. The way you help her just realize what she wants out of life, where she wants to go in her future, how she wants to follow her dreams. Does she want to be a model? Does she want to be an actress? I thought that was really interesting in the way that you help her and kind of how silly she is. I really enjoyed seeing her silly side. But the stuff with her actually at her modeling job, I found really frustrating and hard to watch. Again, I'm not a fan of that mean girl trope and then everyone falling for this girl. It's a personal opinion. I don't like it, so I didn't find her romance terribly compelling. Not that she's a bad character, I didn't like that direction. Personal preference. Now here you can see I'm moving on to the cup of coffee. And this is definitely not the Siren persona. Here is where I completely changed my mind. I was about to go in and draw that character, and I thought it would be so messy. There's so many details on that persona. It would be hardly recognizable. Starbucks has a mascot. Why don't we use mascot of Persona 5? And I think it also works because Mona and Ann have a really interesting relationship dynamic that's unique from all the other characters with Mona. So once I thought of it, I'm like, obviously, this is not going to be a Starbucks equivalent. This is Mona Coffee. This is its own thing. And I'm really, really happy I went in this direction. I love how it turned out. This little logo of his little kitty face. It's so cute. Really, really glad that I did this. Sometimes you just got to roll with it. You change your mind and maybe your plans don't work out exactly how you wanted them to. And I'd say this drawing is a good example of work around your plans sometimes. So with this cup, I'm actually shading it a lot more subtle than I usually do. Like I said, I enjoy high contrast. Just look at that hair. But with the cup, it's such a subtle color that I thought that using really, really high contrast tones and shadows and highlights would take away from it more than it would add to it. So in the end, I decided just to not do it. And I think it turned out a little bit better that way. Ultimately, I did not include the background work in this drawing because it just went far too long. If you watch my horror video, it was pretty much the same thing where I just put in shapes and you could see the final product now. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. I also played a little bit with the saturation and contrast, so the colors are going to be a little bit different, but I think it looks really cute as a sister piece with the Haru, and I'm really, really happy. And again, I'm feeling so much more motivated and inspired by this. I'm moving on and working on another character. If Ann isn't your favorite and Haru isn't your favorite, maybe you should join me again and see if I draw your favorite character next. And this is my sneaky way of asking you to like and subscribe and join me again next time. I post at least once a week, sometimes more, and I would love, love, love if you would join me again. Thank you so much for checking out my video, and please have an artsy day.